Well, welcome everyone to the Coalition for Marriage YouTube channel. If you're joining us for the first time, I have to say you've picked a wonderful time to join us because I think this is one of the most special of our interviews. We've got somebody with us today, Professor Carl Trueman. First of all, Carl, would you like to say hello to our viewers?
Hello, it's great to be here.
You'll notice from Carl's accent maybe that he does originate from the UK, but he's actually at the moment a lecturer in the US, a researcher, an author, and one particular book that Carl has published is something I want to talk about today, which raises, I think, an absolute seminal issue for supporters of the Coalition for Marriage. And it's a book, The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. And in that book, Carl, I think you come up with the premise that A, we're in a culture war, and B, that what you might call traditional or real marriage, this concept of one man, one woman, lifelong monogamous marriage, is right at the heart, the kernel of that culture war. And Carl takes in his book the idea that, look, it wasn't that long ago, you would have been thought something very strange about you if you said that you were a woman trapped in a man's body. Yet today, it's something which is almost deemed acceptable by a lot of society. I wouldn't say the majority, but a lot of society would say that's a perfectly acceptable thing to do and to say. Carl, would you say that's an accurate summary of your book, first of all?
Yes, so in the book is an attempt to explore how the sentence, I'm a woman trapped in a man's body, has come to make sense, not simply to people who've sat, say, in Judith Butler's gender theory seminars at university, but to the ordinary man or woman in the street. As you say, I suspect perhaps not a majority of people yet buy into that idea, but I would say that those who have their hands on the levers of power buy into that idea and are increasingly normalizing it within Western society.
What's the problem with that?
Well, the problem with that, of course, is that it flies in the face not only of centuries or the default position of humanity throughout the centuries. I think it also flies in the face of nature. What it does is it separates this notion of gender from biological sex. And more significantly, I think it prioritizes feelings about reality over reality itself. So to take an example, if you were to go to your doctor 100 years ago and say, I'm a woman trapped in a man's body, your doctor would probably have acknowledged that was a problem and would have attempted to treat your mind in order to bring it into conformity with your body. Now, if you go to your doctor, certainly in certain parts of the United States, your doctor would be legally obliged to treat you as if it's the body that's the problem, not the mind. So what's happened in the last 100 years? Well, psychological feelings, psychological states have become authoritative to the extent that everything else must be bent in order to conform to them.
Would you say it's almost like this identity crisis that we've got in society, Western society, I have to say, and that's an interesting concept, of course, because Western society is by no means the majority of the population of the earth. We're a significant minority, in fact. But would you say that identity crisis, it's almost like a religion in and of itself, because it denies science, it denies what the eyes can see, and something which you believe and feel inside becomes more paramount than anything else?
Yes, it's not a rational thing in the traditional sense of the word. I think there are reasons why it seems to make sense today. Some of them are to do with how we have over the last few hundred years come to prioritize inner feelings as being the authentic part of ourselves. Partly, I think, also outward changes in society. When you think of how human beings, we traditionally find our sense of identity through looking to external markers that have a certain stability. We might say, 50, 60 years ago, that the typical person would look to family, religious affiliation, maybe church, family, church, a nation, in order to know who they were. Now, of course, family, church, and nation are all highly contested, very unstable concepts, and so they provide no firm ground upon which to build a sense of self-identity. So you have this interesting and I think fairly unstable collision or combination of a self that is very much rooted in subjective feelings, emerging at the very point in history where external objective factors for identity are crumbling around us. And so it's an interesting cocktail that produces this rather plastic view of what it means to be a human being.
Yeah, and there almost seems this kind of struggle between those who feel that there is a degree of objective morality that naturally exists and those who feel they don't, irregardless of your religious persuasion. So Coalition for Marriage, we have people, supporters from all faiths and none, but most of them would think, well, actually, the idea of monogamous one man, one woman marriage is a pretty objective thing in society and something that deserves recognition and support. But I wonder, Carl, if there wasn't the war, culture war going on, and if people of perhaps our standing stood back and said, fine, have it your way, what do you want? What would the ultimate end goal look like, do you think?
Well, I'm a historian, not a prophet, so it's hard to predict the future, and I'm very mindful of that statement in Shakespeare's King Lear: as long as you can say it is the worst, it is not the worst. So where this will all end, I don't know, but I certainly think that what we will see in the next decade or so is an increasing push to normalize transgenderism. On the sexual ethics front, we could well see the taboo against incest falling. I think that legal and cultural precedents on other sexual issues can be applied to incest that will legitimate it. And the big question is, will pedophilia, or engaging in sexual relations with underage children, will that become socially acceptable? One hopes not, but I'm not sure that the way sex is thought of today, i.e. what makes a sexual act moral or not is whether all the parties consent. I'm not sure that consent is strong enough to prevent pedophilia getting hold of the public imagination on two fronts. One, I think pornography, the widespread use of pornography, is transforming the way a lot of people think about sexual behavior. And two, legally, we don't grant consent absolute status at law anyway. We make our kids go to school, for example. And if your kids are like my kids, they didn't consent to that. Certainly not all the time, but they had to do it. So I think there are some interesting hostages that we have given to fortune at this point. Again, it's possible that society will pull back and will not push these things through to their logical conclusion. I pray that will be the case, but I'm not fully confident that will happen at this point. No way of telling in advance.
And as a historian, you will look at how we got here and how things have happened in the past and the similarities between the way things have happened and the way things are happening. But I wonder, tech has given us something new. We don't understand social media. We don't understand those people who spend, and there are quite an increasing number of them, the majority of their conscious life online, being whatever they want to, and then taking that philosophy into the physical realm, if you like, to be whatever they want to. That's kind of point A. And point B is it's almost an ideological thing where you've got a lot of people, and we're apolitical as an organization, but you do find a lot of people who like borders, they like demarcations around things, whether that be countries, whether it be sexualities, whether it be biology, and you've got people who don't like any borders at all. And again, combine that with the opportunity that the online realm gives, and you get much more exposure of things that maybe otherwise wouldn't have had such exposure.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I've said on a number of occasions that I could also have written the same book I wrote, focused on the statement, he pledged allegiance to ISIS online. Because when you think about that statement, what does that statement say? Well, it says, and this was often young men, even young women in Britain from good homes. These were not kids who'd grown up on the margins of society or in the hood or on the street. These were kids from good homes. And yet, for some reason, ISIS, that they only met or encountered online, gripped their imagination, gripped their reality more than the people they actually knew and the world that they actually inhabited. And I think that's extreme example of a phenomenon that's emerging that you've alluded to here, that online reality is beginning to trump real reality. And you see this very much in the trans movement, because the trans movement among young people is being driven by YouTube and TikTok videos. And what, of course, the internet does is it tells powerful stories. And I would say, the difference between people who, like borders and the people who don't like borders can often come down to the story that grips their imagination. A story of inclusion or exclusion, for example, a story of a nation's greatness, or a story of a nation's crimes and misdemeanors. So I think tech is transforming the way people connect or even conceive of reality. Martin Heidegger, the German philosopher, once made a comment to the effect that, the real danger from technology does not come from the technology that allows us to kill ourselves with great efficiency, nuclear bombs, et cetera. It comes from the way it changes our fundamental humanity and our relationship to the world. And that, I think, is what we're witnessing now through social media. I am very glad that social media is very unreal to me, but I'm aware that the students I teach, it's the very air that they breathe.
Then there's also this element which you might be able to comment on as a historian, the element which is behind a lot of our social movements, and that's the desire to burn it all down. There is a certain faction in society who just want to tear everything down, and they've always been there, and they've been behind a lot of social movements going back through history. I wonder, how much do you think that's taking place here?
Yeah, well, I think implicit in the notion of the modern self, that we are our feelings, implicit in that notion is that really society and its structures and other people are first and foremost potentially adversarial to us. They're the things that prevent us from being really ourselves. And that has implications for history and for institutions, because as soon as you start thinking of yourself as first and foremost autonomous, Rousseau says, man is born free and everywhere is in chains. As soon as you start thinking of yourself as born fundamentally free, everything becomes a potential link in the chain. And what we're seeing now, I think, is the harvesting of that kind of thinking in society. And again, there's enough evidence out there that institutions can be corrupt. There's enough evidence out there that people can be damaged by history. There's enough evidence out there that, the history of Britain and America is not necessarily always the glorious history of democracy and freedom. And we're also seeing a rising generation who are aware that the things they face in life are in some ways more challenging than I face. It's much more difficult to buy a house now. Capitalism can look far less plausible when you're leaving college with huge debt and you can't get a down payment on a house, and maybe you've got a law degree but you're waiting on tables in a restaurant. There are all kinds of things in modern society, I think, that tilt the younger generation towards finding the burn it down kind of thing rather attractive. In America, it was interesting that when Bernie Sanders, the very left-wing candidate for the presidency, pulled out of the presidential run, a proportion of his supporters shifted to Donald Trump, which doesn't make any sense when you think of things in a traditional left-right divide. But if you come at it from the perspective that you've proposed here, when you think of it in terms of a burn it down to or maintain it divide, Sanders and Trump are both on the burn it down side of the
Drain
equation.
the swamp. It's the same thing.
It makes a certain kind of perverse sense in that context.
So thinking about how we get involved in a solution, assuming that it is a problem, assuming that actually there is a way that seems good, as the Bible might say, there's a way that seems good to a man, but the end is the way of death. Similarly, there are some ideas and policies which, because they're popular, might not necessarily mean they're good, and they could end in bad things. And actually, historically, it looks like marriage, growing up with your mum and dad in a happy married family is actually the ideal, and it leads to the best outcomes. And if you want to steer things back in that way and reintroduce that as something which is actually good and not something to be burnt down and got rid of and undermined at all costs, how do we do it given some of the problems we've got? And some of the problems are, Carl, that this, and it's a big word, but epistemology, or the idea of what constitutes truth, has been undermined. So facts don't mean anything anymore. Data doesn't mean anything anymore. Logic doesn't mean anything anymore. It's all about what I feel. That's the only thing that's relevant. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, it's a tough question, and I think that the answer, it's not a one size fits all answer. Let me explain that. I think on a national level, at sort of macro level of our culture, it's very, very difficult to think of a short to medium term thing that we can do that's going to fix the problem. Society is, I won't say controlled, because that implies that people are hapless automata who just believe everything they're told. But the levers
that might be the case, mind you, for the majority, but let's not go there.
it could be. I hope it isn't. But I would say that the levers of cultural influence are all in the hands of people who have no interest in promoting traditional marriage. Interestingly enough, I'm actually just writing an article today on a piece that appeared in the New York Times last week on how divorce can be a radical act of self-love. And I point out in my response that the person writing that article is a wealthy upper middle class academic. Unfortunately, the very high interest payments on divorce are paid in the hood, on the streets, in the inner cities, among the poorest people. Promiscuity and broken families wreak havoc on the social fabric of the inner cities. So all of that is to say, nationally, it's the people who write the New York Times op-eds who run the show. They run Hollywood, they run the media, they control the big tech companies. So I don't think there's any immediate short-term solution on that front. Where I do think we can make a difference is at a local level. You know, I mentioned earlier on that I think what social media does is it gives people narratives to make sense of the world. And when those narratives grip their imaginations, they do and think strange things. Well, I think the best antidote, the best response to the idea that marriage is not a good idea is good marriages. You know, praise God, I've been happily married for 31 years. And there are days, you know, when one engages in those terrifying thought experiments of sort of what would happen if I'd lose my partner, in my mind, I said, I would cease to be me. You know, my marriage is good and strong. And I think that the best witness to the world about the value of good marriages is good marriages. And that may involve more than just having a happy marriage. I think that also involves opening your home for hospitality. It involves your friends, the young people in your neighborhood, in your church, in your synagogue, in your mosque, in your classes, in your little league sports teams that you may be involved in. It involves showing them that you have something good and desirable. So I think that the answer is not an you know, we were never you know, nobody ever really argued marriage into being implausible. What made marriage implausible was a variety of other factors that led to certain narratives coming to dominate the popular imagination. And I think the response, therefore, is not an argument, ultimately, though arguments can be helpful. I think the response is good marriages.
And how do we deal with this concept that you are actually more than your sexuality? Your book deals excellently with the fact that man became psychologized, psychology became sexualized, sex became politicized, and now it's all a massive mess, and people are identified by their sexuality, which is just a lot of rubbish, because you are so much more than your sexuality. So how do we meet that one head on?
Well, I think, first of all, we need to be speaking out and writing against it constantly. I'm doing a study group at college at the moment, reading a book by, it's actually a Catholic philosopher, Dietrich von Hildebrand, who was the first Christian to really spot the problem with Hitler. And last night we reached a passage where Hildebrand essentially said, to be silent in a time such as this is effectively to support the Nazi regime. Whatever the cost is, we must be writing and speaking out against these things. So I think we need to refuse the myth of sexual identity, and we need to do it explicitly and frequently. And that doesn't just mean that we need to be writing against the LGBTQ movement. I also think it means that we should be refusing to allow ourselves to be identified in terms of those categories. I say to the students in class, you know, if you identify as straight, historically, that's weird, because you're telling me that who you are is your sexual desire. Your sexual desire is certainly part of who you are, and it's a powerful part of who you are. but it isn't foundationally who you are. So I think we need to be speaking against it, and we need to be carefully policing ourselves to make sure that in speaking against the sexualities with which we disagree, we don't actually concede conceptual ground that means it's game over. Secondly, again, I think the way we treat people. I have gay students. I engage always on a very friendly basis with my gay students because I refuse to put them in this category. Their gayness is an aspect of who they are, and I treat them with respect. So I think there are practical local ways that we can refuse this as well by simply not categorizing people, even in the way they wish to be categorized themselves.
And you're right about the language. In fact, some of our supporters are same-sex attracted, and some of my the most vociferous critics of some of our language, when we, we'll use terms that other people have created that don't necessarily mean exactly what they say. And quite often I'll get notes in, I'll get phone calls from people who just say, don't use those terms, for goodness sake. You're buying into the language. And so it's a very, very good point. Really good point.
And if I can qualify what I've said, it's a tricky one as well, because sometimes in one-on-one pastoral situations, one might make a linguistic concession in order to keep a conversation going.
Yep.
Providing, I think, that one clarifies that one's doing it in order to keep the conversation going and not to acknowledge a broader reality.
Yep. And what about, just finishing off then, engagement in civil society more? Well, I mean, you touched on it, Little League, other bits and bobs like that. Actually get out there and take your opinions with you and massage them into wider society.
Yeah, and again, I think this is it looks different for different people. Different people have different platforms. I'm fortunate I have a platform where I can write, and therefore I think that part of my calling here, particularly because I work at a place which will allow me to write on these topics without jeopardizing my job, I feel a strong moral obligation to speak up because other people don't have the privilege that I have in order to do that. But be involved. Remember Hildebrand's comment that to be silent or to sit back is effectively to default to the status quo. So I think be involved. You and I both live in democracies. Cast your vote. Use your civil rights and your civil liberties while we still have them. It's not that I'm necessarily expecting them to disappear, but they will disappear if we don't use them and exert them. And so I think that it is good for religious people to be engaged very much in wider society. Always to do so, I think, in a respectful way.
And even, Carl, dare I say, get involved with local political associations. I was amazed recently when I found out the tiny number of people who choose the candidates for our local list in each of the local parties. It's a tiny number of people. And you'd think, well, just get involved, find a few friends and go and join, whichever your flavour of politics is, go and join and get involved.
Yeah, I think that's, if you're not involved, you've already defaulted to the other side that speaking is going to win. But I would stress again, do it in a civil way.
Yeah, absolutely.
The kind of, I think Twitter undermines a lot of witness on this front because it's so nasty. Right. We need to treat other people with respect, even as we brutally disagree with them at points.
I'm conscious you've got students to teach, so I'm not going to keep you for too much longer, but the book is wonderful. I would encourage everyone to read it. Is it okay if I ask, is there something else coming out February time?
Yes, there is. Thank you very much for allowing me to make my sales pitch. There's a shorter version coming out from Crossway, which will also come out with a study guide and a set of 9 10-minute lectures dealing with each of the 9 chapters. The idea is that the bigger book is more scholarly, it's denser. The shorter book is designed for youth workers, hard-pressed Westminster civil servants who don't have time to read a big book. The idea is to produce something that would get the message without the footnotes out there, if I can put it that way. So thanks, Rich. Yes, that's coming out in February from Crossway.
Well, if I can guarantee, based on the big book, I will buy several copies of the little book and give it to lots of people. And who knows, maybe we'll have time to get you back again. Carl Trueman, can I thank you for all your work, for all you've done, all you're doing, and wish you all the very best for the future, and enjoy the class you're about to teach.
Thanks very much. Great to have been on.